how to take Dihexa. This is a question that a lot of people ask because there's several different ways. You can take Dihexa orally, which is the most common way. You can also put Dihexa on your carotid artery, so you can apply it topically. And in this video, what I'm going to do is show you not only how to take Dihexa, but how to dose it appropriately. And I'm going to share with you a couple of client experiences where they've seen enormous benefits from Dihexa. I'll also talk to you about when it's not great to be used and when not to take it. So let's jump in. All right, so Dihexa. Dihexa works on the angiotensin 4 pathway, and it promotes what's called neurogenesis. So you get new nerve outgrowths, you also get better synaptic energy between the brain. And what we've seen in brain scans is we've actually seen greater electrical activity in your brain. So if you've had days like I have where you just feel like a bump on a log, I haven't used that expression in a long time, but you're like a bump on a log, you know, and teachers used to say that, like, if they thought a kid was being lazy or something, it's like, well, no, you're just a boring teacher. But if you feel like a bump on a log, which I've had days like that, when I take Dihexa, it just wakes things up in a non-stimulatory way, and it also helps me form new memories, be more creative, and it allows me to trust in my ability to recall very important information when I'm doing my clinical work or if I'm ever speaking. So why would you want to use Dihexa? Well, first of all, if you've noticed memory lapses, where things that used to come very easy for you, like you look at an object and it's like, oh, water bottle, but you're like, it's what? Why can't I think of the name of that? You know, I don't know if you've been there, or if you see someone who you're really close with and their name doesn't come to the front of your mind and you're going to introduce them to a friend of yours and like, this is my friend, and let me introduce you to Justin. You know, it's like you feel horrible. It's the worst feeling. So Dihexa has been studied for patients with Alzheimer's, and it seems to alleviate some of that plaque that can get built up in the brain. It's been studied with Parkinson's disease, and while it's not an FDA-approved treatment for either of these diseases, there's far more complexity related to these diseases. Dihexa can be actually really good even if you have a healthy brain. You may be somebody who's like, hey, I'm at the top of my game cognitively, and I just want to keep that edge, and I want to be able to focus a little longer, and I don't want to have the mental fatigue that can kick in the afternoon. I want to be able to relax more. Dihexa may be the way to go. So one of the things with Dihexa when you're applying it, if you're using oral capsules, and I haven't seen Dihexa be compounded into an injection. Maybe there's pharmacies that are utilizing it that way, but generally speaking, it's well tolerated orally. And when you take it orally, you want to start at about 10 milligrams. If you start too high, it may make you feel just a little bit lightheaded. That's what I've had reports of, but what the research shows is 20 milligrams is generally speaking the right dose for most people, anywhere from 10 to 20. For those of you who may have neurological issues, you could go up to 30 milligrams. And I've even seen patients be on 40 milligrams for like 2 days out of the week just to really amp up that pathway. So the timing, ideally you want to take this in the morning. You can even take it as late as like 2 in the afternoon. Wouldn't necessarily take it before bed. I haven't seen any reports where it keeps people awake. If that's been your experience, I'd love to hear it in the chat box so I can learn from what your experience has been like. But I take Dihexa in the morning before I take my food, and I just find that when I do that, I feel a little more activity from it. You can take it with or without food. There's no hard rule on it. But once again, everything in your biology, the inputs are going to be, you try the input and then see what the output is. See how you respond to it. You know, these are tiny experiments, and yes, you're an N of 1. I'm experimenting on my body all the time, and I find that if I take Dihexa before food, I feel like it gets absorbed better and I notice more cognitively. Dihexa is best used if you get out in the sunlight first thing in the morning. I like taking Dihexa with methylene blue because what methylene blue does is it activates the mitochondria. So you get this really good mitochondrial expression, especially as the sun's rising in the morning. I go get outside and run and activate all of the visual pathways in the brain, so it wakes up the brain. And then I also like taking it with adequate levels of hydration. In fact, one study, they took college students and they had the college students do a test when they were fully hydrated, and they looked at their scores. And then they had the college students just be 5% dehydrated, and that was through the skin test. And what they found is these college students scored, had a 20% lower score on their test results when they were dehydrated. So if you're not hydrated, don't even take Dihexa. Focus on getting out in the sun, getting your exercise in, proper hydration and proper nutrition. That's the foundation, and proper sleep. And then Dihexa just gives you that little edge. We also found, like if you're eating plenty of omega-3s, lots of berries, adequate levels of protein, so you have the energy in your body, you're going to do so much better on this. So how often do you take Dihexa? Because if you're taking it orally, I believe that you need to cycle on things, because if you're working on that same angiotensin pathway over and over again, you're not going to have that same expression. And peptides are kind of like push starting a car. You remember when we had the clutches and you could, the battery was dead in a car and you grab a couple friends, you're like, okay, I'm gonna pop the clutch, and then it starts. I grew up in Idaho on a farm and everything had a clutch. When I first saw an automatic car, I'm like, this is so boring to drive. And now I haven't seen a clutch for years. I mean, it's probably been a decade since I drove a vehicle with a clutch. I kind of miss that. Pop the clutch and the engine would go on its own. So that's what peptides do. They reactivate these genes and these pathways in your brain so that things can start working again. So Dihexa, ideally, you'd want to take it on the days of the week in which you need high focus. And yes, if you have 10 days, I just was with one of my clients, very well known. He travels all over the world and he does these workshops from like 7 in the morning until midnight. And he does that for days straight. He'll go from one event to the next, like 7-day events. And he's making massive changes in people's lives, but the brain can't keep up with all the stimulus for that many days in a row. And so one thing that we're doing is utilizing Dihexa, and he's noticed a big difference in his ability to recover. He said, when I was younger, it would take me 1 day to recover from a 7-day event, and now it takes 3 days. But now that he's on the peptides, he said it's back to 1 day. And he feels better when he's doing the events, more creative. So with Dihexa, you want to try once a week, maybe 10 milligrams, for 1 week, 1 to 2 weeks. And then you can go up to 20. And if you feel better on 20, then that's kind of your set point. And you want to do Dihexa for about 8 weeks. And after the 8-week cycle, then you get on something else like Nupep. So Nupep with alpha GPC. And Nupep is in the racetam family. It actually helps with hearing, which is interesting. Not selective hearing, fellas, but hearing. But Nupep has also been shown to help express greater levels of acetylcholine. And so you have better memory, you have more sharpness, and it helps integrate both hemispheres of the brain. So something you can shift onto. If you're using Dihexa topically, yes, you can put it on your carotid artery. If it has a tiny smell. I don't find it, necessarily offensive, but I know when I've worn it, my wife's like, "What are you wearing?" It's got a little bit of like a medicinal odor, but you can put it on your wrists, you can put it on your inner thighs. But make sure it gets dry, because if you have clothes that go over the top of it, it gets absorbed into your clothes. And your clothes, maybe they benefit from Dihexa. I just don't know if it's really going to help your clothes much, but it will help your brain if you get it to the right place. So here's a patient who came to see us. And this patient was a 48-year-old male, high stress, is tech executive, and he had the post-COVID brain fog. So he still, it had been 3 years and he still had a loss of smell. Like, he can't smell anything. And he's starting to have that short-term memory decline. Side note, one thing that'll be interesting in the future is we'll be able to diagnose cognitive decline just through smell. And if you don't believe me, like, you go to old people's houses and they can smell funny, because we lose olfactory senses as we age. But this patient, we ran his labs and we found massive inflammation. His C-reactive protein was high, he had low BDNF, he also had high levels of homocysteine, and his fibrinogen was really low, and he had poor sleep recovery. He showed us his Oura ring, and he was only getting like 4.5 hours of sleep, and of that, he had like 10 minutes of REM and 30 minutes of deep sleep. Very poor sleep. And we tested him for sleep apnea. Sure enough, we found that was a big issue for him. But we got him on Dihexa. We started him on 10 milligrams for 5 days. He said, I think I'm feeling a little bit. Then we bumped him up to 20, and that's when he started noticing a big jump. We also had him on C-Max. Now, C-Max is a peptide. We had him on the nasal spray. You can inject it as well, but he noticed that he had really good mental clarity. He's using the C-Max twice a day, 1 spray in each nostril. We had him on oral BPC 157 to help with his gut. We also had him on a whole cell core protocol to detoxify his body. And he had a sleep focus protocol. We had him on this 8-hour sleep magnesium and glycine. We had him on 9 grams of glycine, which made a huge difference, and then put him on GABA support. And then after 8 weeks, we did a check-in with him, and he reported a night and day difference in short-term memory. In his words, night and day. He had a sleep improved by 1.5 hours per night. So he went from like 4.5 to 6 hours. But not only that, but he increased his deep sleep where he's getting an hour, just under an hour a night, and then his REM actually increased to 1 hour and 20 minutes. He had reduced sugar cravings, better mental endurance at work. And the interesting thing is, yes, we are doing a gut protocol for him. We were also helping him exercise again, teaching him breathing exercises. So it was a holistic plan that the team put together. But Dihexa seemed to be that one thing that actually moved the needle the most. That's what he noticed when he went off of it. He noticed a little bit of a decline, so we kept him on it an extra month than what we typically would. And then when we took him off it the second time, he noticed no lapse. He just kept getting better and better. So for those of you who are really interested in optimizing your cognitive performance and want to learn more about Dihexa, watch my video on how it's best used. I'll provide a link in the show notes. I'm Regan Archibald. Appreciate you being here, and I'll see you in the next video.